Shore lawmaker says what happened in Orleans Parish this week proves to him that it's impossible to recall an elected official in a larger Louisiana parish.
Representative Paul Hollis says we have the toughest recall law in the country, and as Rob Masson reports, he plans to try to change that.
It's disappointing, but it's not shocking.
Some New Orleans voters still can't believe it.
I was troubled with the second part of the process where 24,000 votes or however many thousand votes got discarded. They were thrown out.
In fact, 99% of more than 32,400 signatures submitted during the 5-day grace period after the recall deadline were rejected for a variety of issues, including possible problems with when they were dated.
I think it was a bad fumble by the recall organizers.
But people familiar with state recall laws were not surprised.
Not only are we the hardest to make a recall, we're to a point where I just believe that it's impossible.
North Shore Representative Paul Hollis is proposing a new law which would lower the threshold needed to recall an elected official in Louisiana based on the number of people who voted in the election, which put the recall subject in office.
The bill that I intend to file this week is going to be, not going to change the percentages that are needed. It will still be 20%. We just want to base it not on such a massive number like qualified voters, those that are eligible to vote. I want it to be like most states do it and make that number be applied to the people that actually voted.
It definitely needs to be improved. There's always room for improvement with lots of things. The recall is definitely one of them.
Our Dillard political analyst expects a flurry of recall activity in next month's legislative session.
I do expect in the upcoming session of the state legislature, we will have several members of the state legislature that will be interested in revisiting the current recall law.
Some voters we spoke with said even though the recall effort failed, they hope it sent a message.
I would hope that at the very least, even though it wasn't successful, that it will at least have people sort of shaking a little bit or at least somewhat worried or concerned that their jobs might be in jeopardy if they don't do better.
Dr. Robert Collins says voters deserve to have a process that works transparently.
When you close the process off from the public, from the media, who's the representatives of the public, what happens is people assume the worst.
And changes in a recall law that has never succeeded in ousting an elected official in a large parish could be on the way.
It's a complicated process, and it shouldn't be easy. But at the end of the day, I just feel that it should be possible.
Voters to recall elected officials. Representative Hollis says Louisiana is by far the most difficult. He hopes to convince state lawmakers to change that to make our law more like California's, where voters successfully recalled Governor Gray Davis 20 years ago.